Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in our 2021 Winter Science Seminar Series brought to you by the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. My name is Ashlyn Shore, and I'm the Science Communication Specialist here at the Southeast CAS. In this virtual science seminar series, we're highlighting some CCAS funded projects that support resource management across the Southeast region. So here's what to expect from today's webinar. We're going to go over a few meeting logistics, including getting some feedback from a quick poll. Then I'll introduce our speakers for the day. They'll present for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for a little question and answer period before we wrap up. So really quickly, I just wanted to cover a few features of the Zoom interface that we're using for today's webinar, though I'm sure at this point we're all very familiar with Zoom and how it works, so I'll be quick. So the controls here on the bottom left of the screen, those are going to allow you to mute and unmute your audio. We are going to keep all lines muted throughout the presentation, and we also ask that you just keep your video off so we can reduce distractions while Corey and Lindsay are presenting. So in the middle of the bottom bar down here, you can access the chat window. And I'd encourage you, if you have any questions that come up during the presentation, just submit those in the chat for discussion after the talk. So we will be monitoring questions there, and we'll pose them to our speakers during that Q&A session. We will be recording today's webinar, and so you can access that and share the recording afterwards on the Southeast CAS website, our Science Series webpage, and on our YouTube channel. So I'm quickly going to just pass the mic over to Aranzazu Lasring, Assistant University Director here at the CCAS.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to launch a short poll just to get a bit of information about who is with us today and to help us know how to continue to get information out. And we'll give you just about a half hour to fill it out. Okay, I'm going to launch it now. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Thank you so much, everyone. Just to share the results here with you. So we've got folks from university, NGOs, tribal nation or tribal organization, and federal agencies. So that's fantastic. That really helps us understand, the diversity of audiences which we try to serve. So thank you again, and I'm going to pass it back to Ashlyn.
Great, thanks Aranzazu, and thank you all for participating in that poll. Looks like that Southeast CAS newsletter is the best way to learn about this. So hopefully you all saw that come through first thing this morning. So I'll go ahead and shift gears into our presentation. First, let me just introduce our speakers. I'm so excited that today we have Dr. Lindsay Maudlin with us. She's an assistant teaching professor of climate science in the Department of Geological and Atmospheric Sciences at Iowa State University. In addition to teaching climate-related courses, she recruits, advises, and mentors undergraduate students in a new interdisciplinary climate science undergraduate program. Lindsay's research interests are in atmospheric science education, and she specifically focuses on climate literacy in formal and informal education settings. She earned her PhD in Marine, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences from North Carolina State University, during which time she was a CCAS Global Change Fellow. And we also have Corey Davis here with us today, another former Global Change Fellow. Corey's an assistant state climatologist at the State Climate Office of North Carolina. His work centers on science communication, including the development of web-based data visualization tools, writing and editing the climate blog about recent and past weather events in North Carolina, and presenting to community and professional groups about climate and its hazards. Corey received his master's degree in atmospheric science from NC State University in 2014. So we've got some NC State alumni and Global Change Fellow alumni presenting today. It's really exciting. So Today, they are going to be discussing a great research project funded several years ago by the Southeast CASC, and the title of their talk is Development and Evaluation of Climate Visualization Platforms Supporting Forest Management. So I'm going to stop screen sharing and I will pass it over to you, Corey and Lindsay.
All right, thanks a lot, Ashlyn and Aranzazu. I'll wait for for Lindsay to get our slides up here. Just to give you a quick overview of the talk, I'll give some background about this project that we worked on and this visualization platform that we developed. And then I'll turn it over to Lindsay and she'll talk about one of the really unique evaluation platforms that we had using eye tracking to help us see how people were engaging with our tool and ultimately how we could make it more usable and more informative. So Lindsay, if you'll go on, I'll start with just some background about this project that was called PineMap. It actually goes back a decade. It was first funded by USDA back in 2011. At the time, it was a fairly unique project. It was one of three of these coordinated agricultural projects that USDA had funded then. Each of them was $20 million in funding over a 5-year period. So very large projects. And historically, most of these had been smaller projects with a shorter time scale, a smaller funding amount. So it was unusual that they decided to focus their funding on these main three projects. In the Pacific Northwest, they were looking at wheat. In the Midwest, they were looking at corn. And then over the southeastern US, they were looking at loblolly pine trees. So if you'll advance, Lindsay, it may seem like an unusual choice. We don't often think about loblolly pine trees as being necessarily a cash crop across the southeast region here. But there's a few reasons that they chose this and why it was important. First off, this is a native species in the southeast. And in fact, this is the only part of the country where loblolly pines do grow natively. So it's really at the home of this species. Loblolly pine trees are also fairly fast growing. They reach maturity pretty quickly. And their stands can be long lived, in some cases from 15 all the way up to 30 years. So they're in the ground for a pretty long time. And because of that, they're also a very effective species at carbon sequestration. And ultimately, this was one of the goals of the PineMap project. I wanted to encourage professional foresters to plant loblolly pine trees, to leave them in the ground, and ultimately to increase carbon sequestration over the next couple decades. So if Lindsay, you'll advance, I'll give a quick overview of who was on the project. As you would imagine, being a 5-year, $20 million project, that money went to a lot of different folks. There were more than a dozen institutions across the Southeast region that were part of this, and something like 40 co-PIs. One of those was Ryan Boyles, who of course is the deputy director of CCASC, but at that point he was at the state climate office with us. And these different people and groups across the region were divided up into 6 different teams. Some of them were working on more of the technical aspect, things like plant genetics and plant modeling for the future. And then others were more, say, end user facing, working on things like education and extension with the professional foresters who ultimately were the target audience of this project and of the tool we developed. And again, the main deliverable that we had in mind was after this 5-year period, we wanted to take the results that the researchers from across the region had found and put them in a single spot they could live on after the end of the project. The idea that we had was we could create this web-based decision support product that professional foresters could use to see how future climate and future climate changes may impact loblolly pine trees. That brings together not only climate data, but also some of the model outputs that groups on the PineMap project had been working on to look at specific things like future growth and yield changes based on that model data. The big question we had, though, is what should this deliverable decision support tool look like? I'll say we had a few false starts early on in the project. Initially, we were thinking of a very localized focus where foresters could see weather and climate conditions basically at a specific location. Well, we came to find out that information was really already available to them through some of the industrial cooperatives. So we changed our focus as the foresters told us what they really wanted was a better way to view those future changes. So to do that, we came up with what we think was a fairly innovative interface. I won't focus too much on the data that we use now because that's not really the focus of the talk today, but just to give you a quick overview, what we wanted to do was let these foresters look at different climate variables that loblolly pine trees were sensitive to, things like the average summertime temperature, and look at these different future time slices. So over, say, a 20-year period later on in this century, using a particular emissions scenario like RCP 8.5, and basically just see what the climate of the region will look like at that point. Now, using a lot of the tools that are already available, what you would typically get is just one number for this period and for this scenario. It would be a multi-model mean value. Certainly, there's some use to that, but it also doesn't really show you what the full range of possible outcomes is, and that's what we wanted to display. So to do that, we took a data set called MACA. This is produced by John Abotsoglu's group at the University of Idaho. Basically, it takes 20 different global climate models and downscales those across the United States. And basically, we're just taking that data for the Southeast, doing some statistics on it to find not only the multi-model mean, but also what the standard deviation looks like. So we can present an interface like you see on the right here, where you're seeing everything from 2 standard deviations below the mean to 2 standard deviations above the mean. Again, painting what we would call the spread of likely model outcomes. If we'll go on, I'll show that this is all encapsulated in our PineMap Decision Support System tool. You see the link on the page here, and I think Ashlyn's also shared that in the chat box if you want to check this out. I'll run through a quick overview, but I'll say to start, the goal of this tool is to use those climate projections and the model data for the future to help show professional foresters what the risks and opportunities are for loblolly pine growth. We know that in a changing climate, in some cases, it may not be as favorable, even within the loblolly pine native range, to grow these trees in the future. At the same time, as it starts getting warmer, say in areas further north, that might open up potential new areas to grow these trees. So the goal of this tool was to try to show, again, what the climate sensitivities look like and how those may change. I'll do a quick walkthrough here just so you can get a feel for what's in the tool and how someone might use it. When you first come to that tool, you'll see just this basic introduction page. This includes some background information and some details about the climate data we're using, the scenarios we're presenting, and that 3-map layout interface that we use. Along the top, we have these menus, and that's where you can select the individual variables and output. So for instance, if you hover over the environment menu, Lindsay, if you'll advance here, that'll show you some of the weather-related tools, for instance, summer precipitation and summer temperatures. So we'll do a simulated click here and go to the summer temperature tool, and that'll bring up this page where you see one map on it. By default, this is showing just historical average conditions across the region. This comes from a separate data set produced by the University of Idaho that basically just is gridded historical weather data. There are also options to view projected change information. To calculate that, we just took the model data, those 20 global climate models that have been downscaled, subtracted off a historical baseline period to calculate the magnitude of the changes. And then also, as you see here, we have a projected average where we're just adding those changes onto the historical data to show what those conditions may look like. So you'll see in the menu at the top, there's an option to select these different time slices in different emission scenarios. If we could click on this future time period one, you'll see we go all the way out through the end of the century. But maybe we want to look at something in the middle of the century. It turns out throughout this project, as we talked to a lot of the professional foresters, they told us that while there was certainly some interest in knowing what would happen by 2100, they would be long gone by then. So they were mainly concerned of changes they might see in the next, say, 30 to 40 years. So this mid-century time period would really get at that. You saw the maps in the background have updated now, showing it being a little bit warmer in that time period. This is showing, again, the regional overview, what locations across the region are getting warmer than others. We also did want to keep that local component. So if you click on the map, that'll pull up information about that location you clicked. In this case, near Raleigh in North Carolina. It'll show the values on the map corresponding again to the multi-model mean and also the values 2 standard deviations above and below the mean. That's showing about a 5-degree range over this time period. And again, having that range visible was really important to us as we designed this. At the bottom, we could also scroll down and then see a time series chart that shows those future changes. So Lindsay, if you'll advance, we'll be able to see that. And again, this is showing all the way from that historical average period through the end of the century. what conditions look like for this location. Again, it's a really useful way, we think, of being able to visualize the spread of those future outcomes. And then if we were to mouse over, and I'll have Lindsay advance and show this over a particular period and emission scenario, that'll again show you the exact values there. So I think a really helpful way of being able to explore these climate projections beyond what you might find on some other tools. So if you'll advance, Lindsay, I'll just mention, you can probably tell with a complex tool like this, the final product that we have is not what it started with. We made a lot of changes over time with the goal of increasing usability and making it a little bit easier for these foresters to get information from it. And to do that, we used an iterative development process. So the flow chart here sort of shows that tool development process. After we did some initial work on it, we wanted to bring in forestry experts, mainly to tell us what were some of those climate variables of interest that affected loblolly pine trees that foresters would be interested in seeing in the future. And after that, we got to work on processing the data, and that was not a trivial task. The entire MACA data set is something like 4 or 5 terabytes. It's really big, so it takes a long time to churn through that data and generate those grids that you see on the tool itself. But once we had generated those, we went through a couple different evaluation techniques. One of those was beta testing, and then another, which Lindsay will talk about in just a minute, was that eye tracking evaluation. And we did this process more than once. We wanted to come back to a lot of those same users and same stakeholders and show them the updates that we had made to make sure that that finished product was as usable as it could be. If you go on, Lindsay, I'll give a quick overview of the beta testing that we did. Again, we did this 2 separate times back in the spring and fall of 2015. The goal was to bring on not only some of our target users of professional foresters, but also some of the PineMap extension team members who we knew would ultimately be sharing and communicating this tool with foresters, and also researchers from within the PineMap project, just to make sure that we were representing their data and their findings in a way that was accurate. We even brought on some climate scientists and climate modelers just to make sure things like the wording that we were using to describe these future changes was accurate as well. So within each phase of beta testing, we first asked these volunteer users just to take some time on their own, explore the tool, work through some tasks that we gave them, just to make sure, for instance, that they knew how that summer temperature tool worked and how to view data there. They would answer some questions for us, and we tried to be as quantitative as we could. For instance, you saw that time series plot that used sort of those bars to show the spread of future changes. Well, we had about half a dozen different options for future time period or future time series plots. And we asked users to rank those so that ultimately we could choose the one that was ranked the most highly overall. We also scheduled follow-up discussions over the phone, just with groups of 2 or 3 users at a time, so that we could discuss any feedback they have and any concerns and prioritize some of the changes that we had made. And again, overall, the goal of this was just to have actual users give us feedback in better ideas about ways we can make the DSS tool more usable. If you go on, Lindsay, then I'll briefly describe the eye tracking that, again, she'll talk about more in just a minute. Again, this is a really clever, really cool thing that we were able to be involved with here. The eye tracking tool just sits on a laptop computer. It follows people's pupil movements as they interact with an image or a web page or a tool like this. It helps show using heat maps like you see on the right, where on the tool people are looking and where they're looking for the longest. In some cases, I think it was actually more important for us to know where people were not looking. You may notice that in the image on the right at the top right corner, there were a couple different pink boxes. This is some embedded help that we had put on the page, basically links to frequently asked questions about how to use different parts of the tool. And you may notice from the heat map data that there were not a lot of people that were looking at those areas and not a lot of people that were clicking on them either. The sort of joking conclusion that came out of this is that people don't read. But it turns out really, I think it's that there are better ways to put elements like this on a web page so that it's easier for folks to see them and to use them. So I'll show in a minute some of the changes that we had made in response to this. I'll first just note that we made 2 different eye tracking tests. The first one we did back in early 2016 at a Society of American Foresters meeting in Durham. Again, this was a great chance to interact directly with professional foresters, with some of our end users, and give them a chance to explore a tool like this. And then later, with some of the follow-up research questions that we had, Lindsay was able to do a second study with some undergraduate students at NC State. And again, she'll share some of those findings in just a bit. Before I turn it over to her, though, I wanted to quickly summarize some of the main changes that we had made in response to both the beta testing and the eye tracking. First off, on that main introduction screen that you saw, we basically reorganized the order that the text was appearing there. The image that you see on the left is a heat map from that part of the tool. It shows basically that people were reading the first line of text, maybe the first word on the lines below that, and then by the time they got down to the end of that paragraph, they pretty much weren't looking at it at all. And we found out talking with Lindsay and some of her geoscience colleagues, this is very common. They actually call this an F pattern, where people do tend to read maybe the first line or the first line of each paragraph, and then they sort of trail off or just skim after that. So as a result, we pretty much reversed the order that text was appearing. We had to put the most important information at the top, knowing that maybe all that people would read. We were bold-facing any important words or terms so that hopefully people would look at those. And then we kind of assumed that final sentence, those final paragraphs, were probably not going to be viewed very much. So we put maybe less important information, at least for understanding how to use this interface at the bottom. If you go on, I'll also show some of the changes we made to the interface itself. First off, like I mentioned, we had these pink FAQ boxes that link to a separate page. We found people really weren't using those, so we changed those to these embedded tooltips. And you see an example in the right plot in this rightmost red box. There are these yellow circular boxes. If you hover over those, it basically gives you that same information that you would have gotten from an FAQ. So I think that encouraged more people to use these to get help on the page. Like I mentioned, also, the tool was designed both to give a regional overview of future conditions and also give you localized information. But we found from some of the initial rounds of beta testing, people just didn't realize you could click the map and select a location. So as a result, that box above the map where it says location, we made it pulse in red. So it was a little more obvious to people that they actually needed to do something to choose a location. And I think the eye tracking results show that did help. Finally, on the map itself, you can see we had a box called Show Layer Options. This was a way people could turn on layers like county lines or that native loblolly pine range. It was kind of hidden by default. You had to click on that box to expand it. We realized also people really weren't using that. They didn't realize it was there. So we expanded it by default. And again, I think that increased the overall usability. The final big change that I'll talk about was to one specific tool. And this was a tool very geared toward forestry and foresters. There's this idea in forestry, and especially with planting, that you can take seedlings from one location, move them to another area that gets up to 5 degrees colder in the wintertime. And by doing that, you really don't increase the cold risk of those seedlings. They could tolerate temperatures that cool. But at the same time, you can get the added productivity of those locations that are warmer and a little bit further south. It's called Schmidling's guidance. So this is one of the first tools we identified that would be really useful for foresters. Again, our big question was just exactly how to display this in a way that'd be usable. The image on the left that you see was our first idea. You can see it kind of looks messy. There's just a rainbow color of lines on the map there. Those represent those different future time slices and where that 5-degree range may move. But what we realized through eye tracking especially is that it just wasn't obvious to people when they came to this tool what order they should approach it in or how they should interact with it. So instead, we made some pretty significant changes that you see on the right. Instead, we're focusing on one time period at a time, and we've changed the map colors to basically represent risk levels. So the red colors represent where you're right up against that 5-degree range. You probably could move seedlings there, but if it gets a little bit colder, then it might be risky. And then the yellow and green colors are where it'd be a little bit safer to move those seedlings in the future. So again, I think overall, we would not have known about the difficulties users had with this tool if it wasn't for the evaluation, especially with the eye tracking. And with that in mind, I finished my part, so I'll hand it over to Lindsay and give her a chance to talk about some of those really unique findings from the eye tracking studies that she did.
Thanks, Corey. Oh, we're frozen. There we go. Okay, so the evaluation portion of this study really kind of centered on one key research question: which user characteristics influence the usability of the PineMap DSS? And within that, we were really interested in four characteristics in particular: gender, age, expertise, which we kind of defined as a mix between education level and experience using climate data, and then user performance, which was a characteristic unique to this particular study. So performance through a series of tasks, which I'll walk you through in a moment. Our study design started with participants taking 5 minutes to freely explore the PineMap DSS. Our goal was to get completely new people who are unfamiliar with the website to undergo the study. And so we wanted to give them an opportunity to just kind of freely explore and read what they wanted to read, jump into the tools if they wanted. From there, we had them go through a series of tasks and questions focused on 3 of the available tools at the time: the extreme minimum temperature tool, summer precipitation, and then seedling market, which is what Corey just went over. With each of these tools, we had one overarching task and 2 multiple choice questions related to each tool. At that point, they had an unlimited amount of time to freely work through the tasks and questions, so that removed the pressure of needing to get through this in a certain amount of time. After the tasks and questions, we asked them to complete a questionnaire that really kind of targeted some basic demographic data, but also allowed them to, with open-ended responses, answer questions about their experiences with climate data, what types of resources they're used to using, to use that as kind of a comparison. Eye tracking was used throughout the entire study, and so that's what I would like to jump into now. Eye tracking determines where, when, and for how long participants look at some image on a screen. So in the setup that we used for this study, we had the Tobii X260, which is a laptop version where the sensor sits at the bottom of the laptop screen and is really not noticed by the participant at all. In the second part of the study, we used the desktop version, which is a bigger monitor, but the sensor still sits at the bottom of the screen. The Tobii software then helps us generate a series of figures. The first are heat maps, which we looked at with that F-shaped reading pattern of a big block of text. And the second type is a gaze plot, which shows us where on the screen people are looking and in what order. So this can show us by the size of the circle in this bottom figure, how long a participant focuses or fixate on that particular image or part of the image. And then the software also helps us generate a series of statistics based off of areas of interest, which are the researcher generated figures or aspects of the website or whatever figure you're looking at. That we think we would like to have information on. So one example of an AOI that we used in this study was the big block of text on the home screen. And so that helped us determine how long people fixated or looked at or read that information, how much total time if they started looking at the text and then moved on to something else but came back to that text, and how long it actually took them to find that element. So maybe the text in this example might be the first thing that someone notices, but some of the elements on the maps maybe took a little bit longer for people to notice or recognize. With our 2 phases, we really worked with 2 different populations. In phase 1, this was a really exploratory evaluation component. And as Corey mentioned, we worked with the forestry experts at a forestry conference in Durham. The second phase was after a bunch of website updates had been made, and our target audience or population there were undergraduates. Between the 2, we had 42 participants total, 30 in the phase 1 and 12 in phase 2. We have some basic information here about the breakdown between males and females, their ages, and the degrees that they were already in possession of or working toward. And then with the undergraduates, their class level. This is our example task and question. So I wanted to walk through this with you. The task really asks them first to navigate to a particular tool, select a few features to toggle off or on. And then one of the multiple choice questions with the seedling markets tool asks participants, what is the trend with time from the historical or the black shaded region in the map to the 2080, 2099 or magenta shaded region? And how do these trends differ from the lowest likely to the highest likely temperatures? So what we were asking participants to notice is that from the black region to the magenta region, their eyes shift northward. And from the lowest likely on the left-hand side to the highest likely on the right-hand side, the distance between those shaded regions actually spreads or grows. So the correct answer for this question is northward with more spread. With that particular tool throughout this study, we noticed that a lot of the differences centered or were most noticeable in that tool in particular. So I wanted to start with first highlighting some of the gender differences that we found. From phase one, remember there were about 30 participants, and so this figure is looking at about half of them. With the males on the left-hand side, we've got a heat map that shows the majority of their attention was focused on the map, the center map in particular, with a little bit of attention given to the latitude, longitude boxes where they needed to enter in a specific location for Little Rock, Arkansas. Compared to the females then, their attention is a little bit more spread out. So there is some fixation on the same latitude, longitude text boxes, but a lot of attention is actually given to the different features of the tool up above. And then this hotspot here is actually in that drop-down menu that Corey described earlier. There is some attention given to the map, but really a lot of the attention is given to, or the strongest attention is given to other aspects of this tool. We see similar results in phase two. So this is now switching to the undergraduates. There have been some website updates at this point, but we do see some differences again, a little bit separate from those that we saw in phase one. With the males here on the left-hand side, again, some attention is given to the latitude, longitude boxes, some of the other features they had to toggle off or on for the task. A lot of attention is given to the center map, but some attention is given to the highest likely temperatures here on the right-hand side, with a little bit on the lowest likely temperatures as well. With the females though, some more attention is still given to the top features of the map, but the highest number of fixations or the most attention really was given to this drop-down menu. And a little bit to the map itself, but very little attention is actually given to the left and right panels. And if you think through that question again with me, we were asking for them to notice the difference in two shaded areas and then compare the lowest likely to the highest likely. So they needed to really look at all three maps in order to adequately answer that question. And what we unfortunately saw is that with females not really looking at all the correct information, especially in phase two, we actually saw lower performance in the phase two females. So this figure shows us a total score out of 6 possible. So this comes from the 2 multiple choice questions for the 3 tools that we evaluated in this study. The 1 indicates phase 1 males and females, and the 2 indicates phase 2 males and females. And so the number of users who scored whatever total score. To kind of put that into perspective, if we looked at all the participants in this study, all 42 people, on average, the males scored 4.74 and females scored 4.21. If we look at just the phase 1 forestry professionals, that difference is a little bit smaller, but the males still outperform the females with an average score of 4.6 versus 4.45. And in phase 2, that difference is actually really pronounced with 5.25 for the average score of males and 3.88 for females. I'd like to address that I don't think these results indicate an inherent kind of ability to answer these questions. I think a lot of it is the activities and skills that children develop and then carry with them into their college education and eventually into their career. And so the more that we can train students of all genders to explore kind of maps and figures of that sort, the more likely we are to decrease this performance gap. The next consideration we looked at were age differences. So to start, the little circles with the X's in the middle represent all of the undergraduate students. And as you might expect, their ages were kind of consistent with the typical undergraduate student population, ranging from 18-19 to 21-22. So their scores and ages all kind of align on the left-hand side of this figure. The rest of the markers are divided by those from the professional foresters with bachelor's degrees in the red circles, those with master's degrees in blue squares, and those with doctorate degrees in this kind of four-pointed black figure. What we see with age here on the bottom is in general a downward trend in age. This is also consistent with some other website usability research that has been done that just shows in general, older populations are not as familiar or comfortable using web-based products or websites. And so it makes sense that it might be a little bit slower for them to navigate through the process, or they might be less accurate. And again, that's really consistent with other findings. What complicates or adds to the complexity of this evaluation is that our most educated population or portion of the population is actually kind of lumped on the more right-hand side of this figure, or representing that they're older in age on average than the other groups. So in addition to looking at education level, we also wanted to consider their experience using climate data prior to this study. So one of the questions we asked is, do you regularly use climate data? And so those, or look at or utilize in some way. And so those who said yes will have a yes next to the individual breakdowns, and those who said no do not. So focusing on those with doctorate degrees, all of them actually said yes, they do regularly use climate data. But if you look at those regions, the breakdown is that they scored anywhere between 3 and 5 out of the total possible score of 6. But none of them actually scored a perfect score on this series of tasks and multiple choice questions. Our master's group did whether or not they had previous experience using climate data. So we see a spread of 3 to 6 on their total scores. And if we look at our undergrad, both professionals and bachelor students, there are kind of a fair amount of spreads represented here as well. But the one thing I wanted to note is that our 3 lowest performers, or those on the lower end of the spectrum here, all of them recognize that yes, they have used climate data in the past. So what we could conclude from this aspect of the evaluation is that education did not guarantee, or highest levels of education did not guarantee a perfect performance on these series of tasks and questions. And previous experience using climate data was also not a very good indicator of success navigating through these tasks and questions. The other thing that I think is important to consider is overall how those who performed really well compared in their eye tracking behavior to those who did not perform as well. So I want to start with the phase 1 high performers, which we defined as anyone who scored a perfect score, so 6 out of the total 6 questions. And with our phase 1 group, we see that a lot of their attention is really given to the center map itself. There is some attention from all 3 participants where each participant is differentiated between or by the color of the circles. And so some of the attention is given to the aspects of the web that they needed to toggle off or on for this particular tool and task. And they do, although not as much, they do look at the left and right panels for lowest and highest likely temperatures. Similarly, our phase 2 high performers had a lot of the same eye tracking behavior. The majority of their attention is spent on the center map. You can see that some attention is given to the drop-down menu where they were looking for the thing to toggle off or on. Same for the top region of the tool. A little less attention is given to the left-hand lowest likely temperatures part of the figure, and some attention is given to the highest likely temperatures. So in terms of helping them answer, in particular, the seedling markets question, where they needed to look for those different shaded regions and then compare the figure on the left to the one on the right, it seems that in both groups of high performers from both phase 1 and phase 2, we're seeing eye tracking behavior that matches the pattern we would hope to see in order for them to accurately answer that question. Then we get to the phase 2 low performers. In this group, we focused on those who scored less than or at 3 out of the total 6 possible. If you'll remember, this also happens to be 3 females, as noted in a few of the figures I showed just previously. What we see is some attention given to the center map, a lot of attention given to the drop-down menu, some kind of minimal attention given to the other features that they were asked to toggle off or on as part of this task, and very, very minimal attention given to the lowest and highest likely temperatures. So when it came time for these participants to answer the questions related to this particular task, they had not looked at the information they needed in order to accurately answer this question. So essentially what we could conclude from looking at these 3 groups of participants is that those who consistently performed well or answered the questions correctly, they were utilizing all the information on the screen and taking it all in. Those who did not perform as well, it was really a product of them missing the relevant or necessary information, primarily in these slightly smaller lowest and highest likely temperatures. So coming back to our research question, obviously what we are showing today in terms of the evaluation are some of the big picture highlights and not all the detail that you would find with the rest of the data. But when it came to gender, what we noticed in general is that males and females fixated on different aspects of the PineMap DSS. In general, males tended to fixate more so on the map itself, while females fixated on other aspects of the tool, like the features that they could toggle off or on at the top of the tool, as well as reading some more of the information. On average, males performed better than females, and part of that might have been that the males were more focused on the maps, while females were probably accumulating more information about the tool in general or the series of tools. When it came to age, what we noticed is consistent with previous literature, that anything kind of in a web-based format will take longer to process or work through, and sometimes lead to decreased accuracy with increased age. When it came to expertise, which again we defined as a higher level of education and previous experience with climate data, these 2 factors really did not guarantee success in navigating through the tools and working through the tasks and answering questions. When it came to user performance, what we were able to conclude is that high and low performers had very different gaze paths or different eye tracking behavior. And ultimately, the low performers were likely low performers because they missed a lot of the important or relevant information. Last, I think it helps to end with some recommendations. First, my suggestion would be to know your audience. And so that might involve some sort of survey or kind of working with your stakeholders. But things to look out for would be gender differences, age, education level, experience, and overall expertise in the area of interest. Second, I think it's really important, and hopefully today's presentation has justified the importance of evaluation. And I think it's especially important to start early and to evaluate often throughout the process, and again after any changes are made to your product. And last, as Corey kind of touched on, some of the updates that were made were to highlight the most important information and make them more eye-catching. So if you know that there's an element of your product that is most relevant or important for understanding the information, that might be the thing to highlight, whether that's bold text or some sort of pop-up thing that is eye-catching in terms of color or flashing kind of attention. Corey and I worked with a team of people to complete this research, as was mentioned, Ryan Boyles earlier, but we also worked with Karen McNeil, who's now at Auburn, Heather Dinah Aldridge, and Rachel Atkins. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Lindsay and Corey, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate that fantastic presentation. And we do have about 12 minutes or so for some questions, and there've been some good ones here. Can you tell us what would be the strategy to have users pay more attention to the range of possibilities? What would you expect if all maps were the same size?
Hey, Jared, I'll first just talk a little bit about why we made the maps the sizes that we did. When we first started working on this interface, that was a really important question and one we didn't have maybe an obvious answer to. There was consideration to making all three maps the same size. The reason we did not do that was because there was a concern that that would imply that all three of those were equally likely in the future, when we know that the multi-model mean represents what more of the models are clustering around, and then those side maps are where you're seeing more of maybe the outlier models. So that's why we made that design choice. I have a feeling you're probably right, though. If we made them the same size, people would have been more inclined to pay equal attention to them. So again, it's kind of a tough balance between the scientific validity of the data and the argument we're making versus the usability of it.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much. Lindsay, can you tell us a little bit about the sample size? It seems it was pretty small. Do you feel like you got enough to, or what the breakdown might be between the users within that sample size? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So when it comes to eye tracking data, it's very common to have small sample sizes, in part because the instruments that we use actually record, so the laptop version, the X260, that collects 60 XY coordinates per second for every participant. So if you can imagine a 30-minute study with continuous eye tracking data being reported, that actually amounts to a lot of data that then has to be analyzed. Ideally, or in a perfect world, yeah, I think we would have liked to have had more participants, but there just are some limitations in terms of the analysis and the time that it takes to process all of that data.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. I have a question for Dr. Walt Robinson. Communicating climate change and its implications to the general public is a huge and critically important challenge. What lessons might your results suggest about how we climate scientists, can do this more effectively?
One that I would say for that is just that often, again, when you look at future projections, we're only seeing a multi-model mean. And I think that implies there's this level of knowledge that maybe we don't have. And I actually think it's fine to acknowledge there is a range of likely outcomes in the future. And it's often more useful for future planting, as we saw with foresters, to know what that range is, and especially where maybe it's not all that different from historical conditions. What we found throughout our data was that over the next 20 years through maybe 2040, most of the changes are fairly minor, that they don't differ that much from the historical average. Once we get to mid-century and beyond, that's where we start to see a lot bigger changes happening. And again, sharing that with foresters was really enlightening for them, and they pretty much told us that's exactly the kind of thing they needed to know. So yeah, that would be what I would suggest, is that wherever possible, let's try to talk about what that range of future outcomes is. Obviously, we know that climate models are getting better. It's been, almost 10 years since the MACA data set came online. So as those projections are updated, hopefully we'll have a more narrow idea of what those future changes will look like. But still, I think it may be useful to know if, our average summer temperatures will be 85 degrees versus 89 degrees versus 90 degrees by the end of the century.
I'll add that from the evaluation standpoint, or just communication in general, the importance of knowing your audience. So in this particular study, age and gender seem to be kind of two of the bigger characteristics that influence that, but depending on your format or process for communicating, that might be different. Additionally, I think from maybe the eye tracking perspective, if we're trying to highlight certain features of a figure or a plot, taking the time to walk your students or your general public kind of audience that you're communicating with through your figures piece by piece, and highlighting the things that you think are most important or that you want your audience to take away. So that might be a data point, it might be the range on your axes, anything kind of along those lines, but taking the time to really highlight that or walk participants or your audience through a figure is also beneficial.
Wonderful. Feel free to unmute yourself if you just want to ask a question of Lindsay and Corey. No problem at all. A smaller group now.
It looks like Jared had a follow-up question in the chat. Do you all know how long, like how much time it took for each participant to answer the questions?
Yeah, so on average, I'd have to pull up the exact figure, but on average, the phase 1 participants spent about 900 seconds going through the tasks and questions. And the phase 2 participants were more on the order of like 775 seconds. So the difference of a couple minutes between the two phases, that would suggest that, they increase the efficiency, or the website changes maybe increase the efficiency through which participants could work through the tasks and questions. But that's also a little bit kind of mixed in with the fact that the phase 2 participants were also much younger and probably a lot more web-based literate or savvy. So there could be a lot of factors kind of influencing those differences.
I haven't seen a question about this, so I'll pose one to myself, which is where do we go next in terms of this climate data visualization? Again, the PineMap project ended back in 2016, so we don't have support for that, even though we're keeping the interface up. But we have actually some exciting news, which is that CCASC and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have supported us at the State Climate Office to build a new visualization tool, in this case targeted toward the Fish and Wildlife Service scientists that create species status assessments, especially for endangered species across the Southeast region. These are these complex reports that include a lot of different factors that endangered species are sensitive to. Obviously, that includes weather and climate. And historically, these scientists really haven't had a great way of getting those climate change projections and that future data. So we've built an interface. We've got a sort of beta view version now. And we've actually already had a chance to do some eye tracking evaluation on the mock-ups that we made for those. There's a geoscience team down at Auburn University that was able to help us out with that. So like I said about the PineMap tool, doing that evaluation early and often throughout a project is extremely useful to make sure that the final output is useful. So I think that's the case with this one as well. So hopefully in another year or two, we'll have that final tool to share, and maybe you can come back and do a webinar about that one as well.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, Corey. If you guys could come back and do like a follow-up, kind of building on what you've already presented here today. One question I have, and maybe you all have considered this as you're embarking on this next step. I know when you showed kind of the phase one, and you had some help boxes up in the top of how to kind of guide users through the platform, and you know kind of said, like, you know, people don't really like to read, or you know, maybe they just kind of want to figure it out themselves. Did you all consider maybe like a video tutorial to kind of appeal to folks who may learn, you know, visually or audio based, to kind of give like a primer prior to people going into this?
Yeah, we definitely did. And in fact, for some of the other tools that the State Climate Office has made in the past, we've put together video tutorials. And I'll say that the reaction or reception to those is actually kind of polarizing. That there's some people that really like to view that. And then I sort of think of my generation, like we would get, you know, some electronic thing for Christmas, take it out of the box and throw the instructions away and just figure it out as we went along. I feel like that's how, you know, like a younger generation is reacting to websites and web tools as well, where, you know, we don't want someone to tell us how to use it. We just want to do it on our own. So yeah, it's been really interesting to see how some people like that type of tutorial, and then some people just say, I don't need that. You know, I'll never look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know kind of the demographics on the thoughts behind that, because I may be guilty of opening something and just throwing the instructions out, figuring it out myself. Are there any other questions from anyone on the call? Please feel free to unmute yourself. We don't have much time left, but want to make sure everyone has a chance to get their questions in. And if not, I will go ahead and share just a final slide in our last 2 minutes. Are you all able to see that okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I just want to wrap up by letting everyone know about the next presentation that we have planned. This is actually a seminar we're going to be jointly hosting with our partners at the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. That'll be on December 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, given by Dr. Michael Runge of the Eastern Ecological Science Center at the Patuxent Research Refuge. The title of his talk is going to be Managing Waterfowl Harvest Under Climate Change, Time-Dependent Optimal Policies to Address Non-Stationary Dynamics. So this is the first webinar that we're jointly hosting with another CASC. So I hope that you all will plan to join us for that presentation and discussion. You can find the link to that here at the bottom. There's actually not going to be registration for this talk, but we'll make sure that the link to the Zoom is posted, you know, within a week of that. And of course, we'll send out a reminder email to our mailing list. A quick note that by registering for today's webinar, you will be subscribed to our mailing list, just so you're in the know about upcoming presentations and what we're up to here at the CCASC, but you're of course welcome to unsubscribe at any time, though we do hope you'll stick around and stay in the know with what we're doing. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions, and I can send those along to Corey or Lindsay if you all have any follow-up questions. Like I said, we'll be posting this recording to our website. But if that's all from everyone, I just want to give a final thanks for joining us today, and a special thanks to Lindsay and Corey for your great presentation and your time this morning. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.